Hello, this is Decimus Claudius, and I would like to welcome you to the to my interview today. I have the pleasure to speak with Caius Petronius Stephanus Turpilianus, who is a tribune of the plebs, and also he is a proquaestor of the Provincia Britannia. I do thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me. And I do
Well,
admire your pronunciation of Latin. I don't think my name's been said so nicely so recently.
Oh, thank you so much. I actually have never studied Latin, but Lentulus actually made a point that we go through Latin names and pronunciations so I don't butcher them.
Well, like regional accents today in your country, my country, there'll be different ways of pronouncing the same thing. So I betray my provincial origins when I speak my name because I was born in Britannia and we're really backwards people here.
um, just on the topic of names, how did you come up with the name?
It was a long story, which I'll try and keep short. I've always had a passion for Rome, and I was aware that it might become all consuming. So I made a point of not engaging with Rome very actively until I went to Herculaneum for the first time in 1997. And I visited a house in Herculaneum and I visited a bedroom in Herculaneum. And that was it. I felt something about that house, and I go there every year to that same house and that same bedroom. And I looked at who was the person who owned the house, and the person who owned the house was Gaius Petronius Stephanus. So that's the reason why I picked the name. It picked me.
Amazing. I mean, I've been to Herculaneum several times, but I never made the connection before.
Well, it's the house of the bicentennial, or bicentennial, or something like that in English. They found lots of wax tablets about a legal case between a daughter who was claiming that she was born free because her mother had been set free by Gaius Petronius Stephanus before she was born, and that was being contested. And it's an interesting legal case. Being a lawyer, I find it interesting, and to have these minutiae recorded is fantastic. About the one of the freedmen of the house was actually stood for the mistress of the house, that the daughter was a slave, and then he changed sides and actually gave evidence on behalf of the lady who claimed to be born free. We don't know the final outcome because Vesuvius destroyed Herculaneum, but it was scheduled to be heard in Rome in the Forum. It was that important.
Oh, wow, that's amazing.
So these people all feature in my book that I've been writing for many years now, in between helping other people write their books and write their TV series. I keep getting distracted, but yes, that's how it got chosen.
Well, we're definitely going to speak later on about various books that you've edited and also about various essays and contributions you made to other books. But since we're on the topic, what about could you just mention a blurb about the book that you're currently writing?
Well, no, I'm currently waiting for my author to get me the third volume of her Colosseum series, which is set in the end of the Emperor Titus's reign and then Domitian's reign, about the first 100 days of the inauguration of the Colosseum, and then what went into actually running that event from behind the scenes. And it's she's a brilliant authoress. It's a very adult book, and I've really enjoyed working on this because we can just deal with themes that I wasn't able to deal with in some other books, which are more targeted for children. And I've really got to know these characters, obviously, because I have an input into what they say and what they do, and I can change things, like a bit like God saying, "No, that wouldn't work that way." Um, so yes, I'm looking forward to that. She's done From the Ashes and Beneath the Waves. I forget the name of the next one, but there's 4 in this series. But I'm trying to encourage her to actually do a pure Roman detective novel because I think she's got a real talent, and I would really want to read that.
Oh,
But
nice.
apparently, people that I work with in the reenactment community have already been inserted into the last book as characters, and I'm going to be in this book as a character as well. So my character in my book is going to be a character in this book. There's going to be an overlap.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Um,
So you'll see
so
Gaius Petronius Stephanus in this next book.
come to life.
Yeah, may not be a nice person, but hey ho.
Now, I want to ask you about how you got into Roman history. I mean, I know that you're from England, and there's so many sites and museums to visit, but like, what was your personal experience?
I meant to actually get out and show you the book, which I got a new copy of, which was a, I think, Penguin book, a Ladybird book about Rome. So I was learning to read basically, and I was given this book amongst others, and I saw a picture of a Roman legionary, and it was that book that was my first engagement with Rome. And then it just, my view is people get involved in Roman reenactment for various different reasons, but there are some who, in essence, are born Roman, born with an affinity for that culture and way of life, and it's not really a choice. You are Roman all the time, even if you are living in the modern world. You're interacting with that a bit like you're always in a strange land for visiting as a foreigner, really. So yeah, I remember when we went to France that I was wanting to see Roman sites in France, so and that was when I was 10 to 14. So I was already wanting to see these sites then, and got very upset if we didn't go and see them. But as I said, it wasn't until 1997 that I let go and totally immersed myself. Before then, I was trying to deal with my family's own history, because we have a long history in the United Kingdom as minor landed gentry. So there's a rich wealth of history to deal with. And I have records of my 24th great grandfather's legal cases as bailiff of the Earl of Cornwall in Derbyshire in the 1260s and 1270s. And so I was initially thinking about novelizing a history about my ancestor, basically as a law officer and detective. So that's still on hold. If I live to be 200, maybe I'll get around to doing it.
Speaking of the United Kingdom, there are so many amazing ruins and sites all over. Do you have a few personal preferences or a few ones that either for the historical value or the archaeological value, like you really enjoy going to?
Well, Bath is always excellent because it's beautiful Georgian architecture to look at, which is modern, quote unquote. Then you have the bathing complex, and the Cotswolds around the countryside around there is just fantastic. And then Hadrian's Wall is our most outstanding monument. You've got 80 miles of different types of fortifications and good museums up there, so you can spend a whole week just driving along that wall. Silchester would be great if we could, after excavating it, we could put it on display and consolidate the remains. I have to shout out to Vindolanda, of course, on Hadrian's Wall, because Andrew Burley's my friend. He wouldn't get upset if I didn't mention him, but that's probably the premier site in Britain and probably one of the premier sites in the whole of Western Europe because of the survival of biological material. The written word is the most important thing we have from the Roman period, and finding the writing tablets up at Vindolanda has given us an insight into the daily life of auxiliaries and their families, and that's just absolutely priceless, as are the papyri we get from Egypt.
Absolutely. I mean, I was there in 2017 for an exhibition along the wall, and it was called, I believe, Hadrian's Calvary 2017, and there was a lot of events. I believe in like 10 different parts of it, and I was blown away with Vinolanda. And interestingly enough, since 2017, there are many more finds that came to light. For instance, the boxer's glove or a wooden sword for a kid, and
Yeah,
it's just amazing. Almost on
toilet
a
seat, the only surviving wooden toilet seat in the Roman world, and also a cartwheel. And we have found more shoes now than all the inhabitants of the fort could have worn, obviously, because they're from very different periods. But our main concern is it is possibly a race against time now at Vindolanda, because global warming is having an effect on the water table, and the water table is lowering, which means that water sodden ground is drying out. And when it dries out, all that biological material, organic material, is going to decay. Yeah, we have so much organic material, sometimes we just can't conserve it, because it costs, when I last checked, it costs £50 to conserve one shoe. Now, if you find 200 shoes, that all adds up. Then we have all these wooden timbers, which in any other context would be priceless, but we can only conserve maybe one or two, and you just have to leave the rest to rot. It's a shame, really. But yeah, very jealous of Vindolanda, because my site we don't really find those kind of finds that they get at Vindolanda. So yeah, but it's my site, so at least it's mine.
So you're speaking about the Roman villa in Bedford.
Yes, there was. We know that there were no villas in the Ouse Valley, unlike the Nene Valley, which is just to the north of us, and we were always wondering why. And by accident, we discovered a Roman villa 3 minutes walk from my house. So I live on the land, and it's underneath the school that my son went to, and it goes underneath the road and then into the field across from the school. And then it turns out to be the most lavishly decorated building in Roman Britain in the 4th century because of the stucco work that was part of the bathhouse there. So not much survives, but we have enough to be able to extrapolate very important ideas about this site. And there's a good chance it was basically an imperial estate that was taken over by the empire in the 270s to manage the grain growing area of the whole Ouse Valley, which became the breadbasket of the northwestern Roman Empire, providing grain to the armies of Hadrian's Wall and to the Rhine, all the way down to Basel.
And how is that site found? And how did you get involved in the project personally?
Well, my wife was acting as a voluntary librarian at the school, and one day she was going by, and they were building a disability ramp because the road is actually higher than the school because it's on a slope. So they had £100,000 to spend, and they built this disability ramp. And in doing that, the lower two slopes of that actually went through archaeology. And the person who was managing the site for the contractors was an amateur archaeologist. So he recognized some of the finds, and he had invited the borough to come up and look at the site. And when my wife went along, apparently she looks like an archaeologist because she has done archaeology with me on time team and things like that. And so he talked to her as if she was from the borough. And of course, she knew to tell me. So she kept it a secret for a bit and then told me. And of course, I rushed up there. And so we entered into an informal arrangement with the contractors to monitor the site because there was no protection, no archaeological protection on it. And we recovered all the material we could do. And what we were going through was a very wealthy late 1st century BC Iron Age settlement. And then there were some Roman finds, and some of the Roman finds were from the 3rd century, including hypocaust flue and coins. And we knew that they must have, because it's on a slope, the only place it could have come from was across the road and traveled down with ploughing. So we knew there was probably an extension of the building in the field across the road, but we never thought we'd have a chance to dig that. And then 50 weeks later, they started building a care home on the top of the hill, and they dug a very big trench for us to put in pipes for water and electricity, and bang, they went right through a Roman building. And that's how we discovered the bathhouse. And then we organized a community project to excavate over several years, and we've amassed quite a lot of small finds from that. And I was the person, because I'd done time team and other archaeological things, I was the ideal person on hand to be able to pop up whenever I wanted to supervise it, at my own expense.
And I remember an episode with a tile and the imprint of a child's shoe. Can you briefly tell the story?
Well, yes. I mean, basically, it was the first ever trench I'd ever dug myself. I've watched other people dig trenches, and then they take finds out the ground, show them to me, then I say what they are. But manpower being short, it was basically me that started this excavation. I went up there, and you could see where the digger had dug through the trench. There was a change in the color of the soil, which told us there was a ditch there. So that at that point, I did invite the borough archaeologist to come up, and he said he had no objection to me digging a hole in that trench. And I came down on one stone, and that stone had a straight edge. I thought, this is a Roman wall, but I thought I better not call the borough archaeologist back until I found another stone to prove it. And I dug a bit more, and I found another stone next to it, which was also a dressed stone. And then I found another one. So 3 dressed stones, and it turned out to be part of the wall which had gone through the trench, so it's much deeper foundations. And it turned out there were only 3 dressed stones of that wall that was above the ground level, and that turned out to be the oldest wall in Bedford. It was built about 260, 270. But because the developers were building this care home, we couldn't save it because the pipe had to go through it. So we decided to take the wall apart ourselves rather than just being destroyed by a digger, to see if we could gain any knowledge about its construction. And while we were doing that, the very day we were doing that, they decided to extend the trench. And that's when I saw out the corner of my eye the digger's bucket go right through a Roman wall. It's a very sad sight to see lots of Roman masonry come up in a digger. So being reckless, I ran up to in front of the digger and stood in front of it like the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and said, "You've got to stop, you've got to stop," thinking my hard hat would save me if the digger bucket came down. And they gave me 30 minutes to look at what might be in the ground. And what we found basically were the subfloor tiles of a bath, Roman bath. So we had a choice to whether to leave them in situ or take them out to get some understanding of what they were. In the end, funny enough, they gave me more than 30 minutes because they stopped for 6 weeks. But at the time, they only said I had 30 minutes. So when we got this subfloor tile home, which is a bipedal, it's a 2 foot by 2 foot, when we turned it over and cleaned it, we saw the footprint of a child. And the child's footprint, he was actually wearing the shoe, which was actually much more helpful than a bare foot, because the shoe was a fashion shoe, which is datable to 250, 300 AD. And they're only worn by men, and they're only, or boys, and only worn by upper caste people, which meant we could assume that the guy had a very good diet, which meant we could work out the average age to height ratio. So we could work out the child was probably 4 years old. And this child wasn't being naughty. They were told to press their foot into this tile because it's a form of sympathetic magic before they refurbished the bathhouse. And so that's what I like about archaeology, is the romance of it, because until we found that footprint, that child was completely lost to history. But now every time I tell this to someone, I give that child some of their life back. I pull them back from the abyss. We don't know the child's name. We probably know the child's father's name, which is Eusebius, and he was probably an imperial civil servant who was sent by the Emperor Aurelian to Britain to reorganize the grain-growing area of the Ouse Valley. So I then made a replica of that shoe to show people, and that's the tile is one of the things we take around with us when we do our talks, because that's one of the things that does really engage the children and the public's imagination.
Absolutely amazing. So do you have any other experiences in archaeological digs personally, or in archaeological research?
Well, I enjoyed my time with Time Team, which was a great series that ran for 20 years on Channel 4, which was one of the most expensive series at the time. And now they've got Patreon support, so they're making new episodes. Their catering was excellent, so I really enjoyed the food. It was great working with the team. And again, one of the reasons why I was asked to be involved was because I have a very broad knowledge of Rome. I'm not an singular expert in any one field. So I'm not the world's leading expert on Roman coins or world's leading expert on Roman glass, but I have a very good knowledge of almost all aspects of Roman culture and life. And obviously I've done reenacting, I cook, I've been learning Latin, I make armor, I make clothing, all these different aspects, which gives you the combination of that is unique. I don't think anyone else has done all the things, or indeed eaten off a full dinner service of Roman plates and things like that. So I'm able to pull from a lot of different sources. So when I see things, I can make these educated leaps, or some people might say flights of fancy, because I know lots of archaeologists are very good technicians, and they're very good at recording walls and for archaeological reports, but they're not so interested in the use of space. Whenever I see a wall, I'm interested, what was the room it was part of? Is it a bedroom? Is it a kitchen? And I just like to think I've been working very, very hard to have a Roman perspective. So when I walk into a site, I see it as a Roman would say, we would not do this, we would do this. Of course, I could make errors, but generally speaking, I've been proven to be right. And that's why my archaeologist friends gained a lot more confidence in my judgment, because time and time again, I was proven right as to my surmise. For example, a long time ago, I went to the site at Oplontis, Pompeia's villa, and at the time they didn't have a good description of the site. They didn't have a brochure about the site. I was walking around saying, that's obviously a bedroom, and that was obviously this and that. So I actually passed that information on, and I think that got included in later versions of their guide. But I first went there over 30 years ago, so it was a lot different then.
Definitely. There are a lot of comments in the chat because this is a live stream. Uh, and I do appreciate everybody for participating at home. Lentulus just wrote, so our Petronius met Baldric from the Black Adder. I don't understand
Well, that's
the
because
reference.
Time Team. I worked with Tony Robinson on Time Team, so he's a very good performer. I mean, it's quite a tiring job doing this 3 days, but when the camera was on him, he instantly came to life and was very, very dynamic. There are various scenes that I've shot with him that haven't, which were a lot of fun, that have never been shown. It's a shame, really. There was a point where we were doing a religious sacrifice, and we actually were using a real calf's liver, and I don't know how many takes we did, 20 takes. It's very difficult handling a bloody red liver and not getting red blood on you. And he was very kindly kept handing me these tissues to wipe my hands. I haven't thought of that memory for ages. Let's brought that back. Actually, that episode was the trouble with temples, and that was one of the most famous, most popular episodes of Time Team. That was done in 2018. We excavated a site just north of St Albans, which is a temple complex, and we thought we might find a temple. But like with buses, we found like 4. And there's a lot of work that goes on after, because the program gave us 3 days to do the digging, and some archaeologists complained obviously that's not a good way to go about doing archaeology. But the fact is, there's a lot of post-ex work that took place, a lot of recording behind the scenes. And one of my roles was basically in that situation was they said, this is what we know about the site. What do you think we're going to find, Stephen? So I sat there and thinking, what are we likely to find? And then I would write basically dialogue, scenarios for depending on what I thought we might find. And then that gave them a chance to fast forward and use one of those scenarios rather than have to think it up on the spot, because it's very expensive to do live TV. So it wasn't scripted, but there were, as I said, scenarios for depending on what we may or may not find.
I'm wondering what sort of, documentaries or TV productions regarding Roman history have you been involved in, and how did you start?
Well, because as a Roman historian, I wanted to get into the mindset of Romans, and that's why I got into Roman reenacting, was to try and live it. What was it like to wear a tunic? What's it like to wear a toga, etc., etc. So I joined a British group, Legio Secunda Augusta, which was recommended to me, and as a result, I've worn legionary armor. I've marched in a testudo. All these things are real memories in my head that I don't have to imagine, and it just built from there, really. And then because I was impatient waiting for other people to make stuff for me, I thought, well, I'll give it a go and make some stuff myself. And then I found out I can make stuff. And so it's almost like, because I'm an artist and I've got good hand-to-eye, coordination, which is helpful. So I just assume that I can make anything and just try. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So I end up making most of my stuff now. And of course, it's cheaper to do that. And you learn by doing. It's easier to make shoes if you're using your own feet each time, because you're making shoes for other people is a bit more difficult, because if you get the sizes wrong, because there's very little difference between what fits and what doesn't fit. So that's how I got involved in Roman reenacting. And then I'm interested in Mediterranean Roman culture. I mean, Britain is a bit of a backwards province, which I've found out even more since my travels around Europe. I visited museums in Dacia, which was a frontier province as well, and I see what they have in their museums compared to what we have here. And you would think you were in the center of Rome, given the quality of the finds, the statues, the epigraphy. It makes you realize that Britain was, bandit country, really was on the edge and never really fully developed as a province. So, and also I find going to international festivals and being with groups of Romans from around the Roman Empire is more authentic, because the Roman Empire was a polyglot of different nationalities being transported from Syria to Britain, from Egypt to Italy. And when I'm with these groups abroad, it really feels much more like the Roman world. And I, as you know, I'm very keen on bringing Roman groups together as a means of communication. So I'm a member of various different groups, and I'm a channel, a neutral channel, which people I think respect, that can talk between different groups, because sometimes, as you know, there can be rivalries, and I can't be I'm not, I don't want there to be rivalries. I want us all to be pulling in the same direction.
Certainly. I actually have a Legio 20 shirt, and I got it back in February in Valeria, Spain. And one of the most famous groups of Roman reenactors is actually the 21st Legion Rapax.
Hmm.
So I hope nobody's offended by my the 20th Legion shirt instead of a 21st Legion shirt.
Well, whereas the individual legionaries didn't move normally between legions, the centurions were always rotated. They would serve in their career. They could serve. I think I know one who served in 14 different legions. Obviously, centurions tend to stay in harness. They never retired. They sort of like died in office, but they were moving all around from one end of the empire to the other. And that's, if we're just stuck dealing with our own individual groups and our own individual provinces, you don't really get a flavour of what it was like to be part of the Roman Empire or part of the Roman army.
Just one more question before we move on from the topic. You've also done consulting work on Roman productions, for instance, to make sure that it's authentic, although they don't always accept your suggestions. How is your experience on the consulting work?
Well, when I was younger and more idealistic, I thought perhaps I could have more of an impact. But as you do more and more productions, you learn that they have their own ideas and they want to have a nod to authenticity, and they like to have people, especially more famous people, named in their credits to give them that air of authenticity. But in the end, they go with what they want to go with. So as things moved on, I knew to take down what they would want to use, not what was actually accurate. And I remember a funeral scene once. Funerals, according to the literature, Cicero, etc., Seneca, white was the color of funerals, a purity of spirit, etc., not black. But having a Roman funeral where people are wearing white looks more like a religious procession rather than a funeral, and the producers didn't think it was something that the audience would accept. So in the end, they went for black. And one of the last productions I did was the Britain's African Emperor, which was about Septimius Severus and his activities in Britain. And I was a technical consultant. I provided some of the costumes, including arms and armor. But in the end, they wanted more bodies, so they were computer generating a large army. So the more individuals they could picture, then replicate that, the better. So they dressed me up as a praetorian. And the gentleman was so pleased he had sourced some of the original costumes from the film Gladiator, the praetorian outfits from Gladiator. And it partly consists of nylon stockings, black stockings, and other bits. So I wore it because I like collecting props and costumes from theatre. And Gladiator is a good film theatrically, but that was probably it for me, because when I was wearing this, I think, is this really what I've come down to? Being in a TV program wearing it probably looks good on screen, but completely inappropriate contextually. So that's why I'm happier working with books like with Melissa Adley, with Caroline Lawrence, who do respect the literature. And in a book, you can have a lot more narrative than you can fit into a 1 hour documentary. And obviously, the imagination is the best thing, because it's hard to replicate things on screen that your imagination can create so easily. So yeah, I'm much happier working on the books and writing the occasional archaeological paper when I've got time, which I don't have, because I'm doing this. This is time I could be editing a book, isn't it?
Well, I'm personally very thankful that you're here, and I'm sure that the other members in the audience, whether it be the live people that are on Twitch now and also in the comments or in future in YouTube, are very glad that you came on and were
Well,
able
happy to
to
do it.
discuss
Happy
with
to
me.
do it.
Because I mean, you are a wealth of knowledge on many different um, aspects of not only Roman history, but also uh, reenacting and experimental archaeology and several other items. And I would say, at least on Facebook, you spend so much time, or at least the pictures show that you spend so much time going to so many different events with Roman reenacting. I'm wondering, which events have you just been to this year? Because it seems like it's been quite a bit.
The number of events I go to has got bigger and bigger over time as I've met more and more friends. Once you go to an event and you're made to feel very, very welcome, it's difficult not to go back again. I could have been in Calcrease this weekend, but I'm in Bulgaria next weekend, and I'm being kindly given an award for my role in promoting Romanitas in Europe, the Eagle of the Danube Award. But so far this year, I went to Nimes in France because that has lots of nice Roman monuments, and I have lots of friends there, and also to make sure I was able to attend the Roman festival that took place later in the year. I then flew from there to Rome to take part in the Ides of March because I always wanted to be involved in assassinating Caesar. I got 2 stabs in, not just one. That was great
Wait,
fun.
quick question. Um, how are you invited to that? Because I saw on Facebook that there was a recreation in the forum, and you're not normally allowed to wear Roman attire in the forum, so you had to have some special permission to do that.
Well, Gruppo Storico Romano is probably the oldest Roman reenactment group in Rome, and they've built good relations over time, although it's depending on the political administration, it ebbs and flows. So they're the ones who get the invitations, and then they invite me because I'm an honorary member of Gruppo Storico Romano. I've been reenacting with them since 2003. And then Natalia di Roma, and I've got lots of friends there, and I'm a member of their senatorial group, so I'm their British senator. So I did that. They didn't do it in the Argentina, the actual site that still exists where Caesar was assassinated, because that's being renovated at the moment. But hopefully one day we'll go back, and Largo Argentina will actually do the assassination right where Caesar was assassinated. So I'm looking forward to doing that. Then I went back to Rome for the Natalia di Roma, which is the first one we've had for 2 years due to COVID. And the organization for that was basically done in 15 days, which is amazing what they managed to put together at such short notice. And all the other groups who managed to turn up were basically a month's notice, because when I was there for the assassination of Julius Caesar on the 15th of March, we still didn't know it was taking place. It was only on the 16th of March we got the go-ahead. So that was incredible, and that was a fantastic experience. And I was able to bring some friends of mine over from Spain so they could take part in that, because I had organized or encouraged connections between the Emerita Ludica and the Natalia di Roma. So people from the Gruppo Storico Romano then went to Emerita Ludica in Merida to take part in that festival. So I was very pleased to make that connection between my colleagues, because I'm a member of both groups. And then after the Natalia di Roma, I did a last-minute trip to Hungary, because I always wanted to take part in the Floralia and meet a lot of my colleagues in Nova Roma, and that was great because there's like 50 Nova Roma citizens there, and that's a new site. And my wife's a quarter Hungarian as well, so we have some kind of connection with that. And then a week later, I went to take part in the Nimes festival, the Hadrian War of the Picts, and I was a guest of the Emperor Hadrian and in the Imperial Box, and that was a fantastic experience, because the arena, when it's full of the audience, and they can, over 3 days, there's about 20,000 people watch this event. If it fills up the whole arena, so you can't see that the seats some of the seats are modern, and all the color and the roar of the crowd is something that you'll never get to hear anywhere else. And that's the closest you're going to be to being in a Roman Games. And to be part of that was a great honor, and some great pictures came out of that. And then I went to Spain, didn't I? That's where I was last, because the festival in Merida is really fantastic. And outside of Italy, it has the largest number of Roman monuments in any one city. So there's a lot to see: the world's longest Roman bridge, 2 aqueducts, a Roman reservoir, another bridge, a circus, a theatre, an arena. I was the editor of the games there, which is very kind of them for the 2nd year in a row. Even though I don't speak Spanish, I got to decide who lives and dies, and joked and played with the audience in English. I mean, some of them understood it, and there was a translator. So that was an honor. Very hot though. It got up to about 38 degrees on the Saturday, which was a bit too hot because I was wearing a winter weight toga. And then, yes, I'm off to Bulgaria next weekend, and then, if I can manage it, the weekend after that, I'm back to Rome to take part in another event with Romanitas, which is another one of my groups, in the Circus of Maxentius. And then I think I have a whole week in Britain doing some events here before off to Romania for DACFest, which is another one of my groups. And they're another great bunch of people to work with, very friendly.
Wow, I mean, absolutely amazing. I'm pretty jealous. I travel a lot, but I can't I can't do all of those items. So,
I'm
speaking of
making the
merit,
most of it while I've still got my health and I still have arrangements go. I won't be able to do this forever, so now's
of
the
course.
time.
Speaking of Merida, I've actually been there twice, and it's one of my favorite sites in all of Spain. And one thing I believe that you left off was the museum, which, okay, it's not a ruin, although I believe in the basement there are some archaeological items.
It's a Roman road and that runs through it.
Absolutely wonderful museum. You could spend hours and hours there, and interesting architecture. But speaking of Merida,
I was a witness at a Roman wedding that they scheduled in the museum. I was one of 10 witnesses. That was quite a spectacular event. And I had to impress my signet ring into a wax tablet as a witness. And then I used this ring here. And I told them at the time, that's actually a real Roman ring. And that's Fortuna. Sorry, it's Nike, the goddess Victoria. So I actually impressed a real Roman signet ring into their wax tablet, because this couple were actually genuinely man and wife. So they got to keep that. So
amazing. And I remember reading that the festival went on for about 6 days. What other types of events did you participate in, or was it, or there were available for the audience to participate in?
yes, I mean, a lot of the events are for the local community to start off with. So the four main organizers of this event have done sterling work in building up this festival, because now it's all the community takes part, and there are lots of shops selling Roman style costumes. Obviously, they're not authentically Roman, but when the festival is taking place, certainly on the Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, large numbers of the public are also dressed in Roman clothes. So sometimes it's difficult to tell who is the reenactor and who's actually just a Meridian citizen. But they engage with the schools. They have a naming ceremony. They have a pray for young children to go to the Temple of Diana, and they get their Roman names. There's another one now for adolescents when they don their togas of manhood and pallors of womanhood. And this year, for the first time, they had a special service, which I took part in at the very end, where they engaged with the elderly. And they had people from five, not care homes, but day centres, 5 different day centres. The elderly came along dressed in Roman clothes, and they read out various dedications to various gods. And that was to engage with that part of the community. So there may be other examples in Europe that I haven't seen or been to, but so far, this is a unique situation. Nowhere in Europe is the local community so engaged with a Roman festival and so proud of their Roman heritage. They are seriously proud of their Roman heritage. So if you turn up in Merida being a Roman enthusiast, you already got your foot across the door. You're welcome with open arms, and they are so friendly. You know, like in any country, you have towns where people are less friendly, towns which are more friendly, but Merida is particularly friendly town. And if you hear someone bib a horn in Merida, it's very, very rare, and you know they're probably a visitor. This is a town where when they see someone standing by a crossroads, by the Pelican pedestrian crossroads, even if you haven't put your foot on the crossroads, they slow down. They're that polite. So I would seriously consider retiring there if it didn't get so hot in the summer, which is just too hot for a poor British person like me.
Um, so Hortensia Faustina wrote in the chat, "Why is Merida such a rich site?" Now, obviously, it was a provincial capital in Roman times, but why do you think there's so many well-preserved ruins still there?
It's difficult to say, really. I mean, it depends on the communities that took over, the Visigoths and all these other people that took over, whether they chose to mine certain sites for materials or not. I mean, the sites have been mined, and you can tell that the lower levels are preserved because they've been infilled with deposition material. I think the way of life and the structures they built were ideally suited to that climate, and so if they're sturdy, there is no real need to change them. And sometimes also, if areas are not doing very well economically, you don't have the money to change things. So a lot of the heritage we have in Britain, for example, is not because they valued the Watland Door buildings that they had. It's just they didn't have the money to knock them down and build Georgian buildings or build facades. So sometimes it's a poverty of a city that results in things being preserved, not its wealth, because there are fashions, as you know, for things. I don't know, maybe the gods have always favored Merida.
Well,
But it's
that's a very good insight. I never even thought about it. That some people or some community might be too poor to tear down all these buildings to reuse them
because a lot
for
of them
building
were built,
material.
they were built as stone. They're not built of very, perishable materials. So once you built them, they last. If you look at the provincial forum, the so-called Arch of Trajan, which they have, I mean, that's all. There's no mortar holding that in place. It's the weight of the stones still. And the other thing, I have a great deal of respect for the governance of Merida. When they find Roman remains, they tend to preserve them. And so one of the ways they do that is they will build a building on stilts on top of the remains rather than actually even have them in the basement. But otherwise, they have various Roman remains in the basement. When they find a bit of Roman road, it's normally put on display. They really, really do cherish that in a way it isn't in London. We found all sorts of things in my lifetime which have been covered up or destroyed. We found an original part of the Roman wharf, or wooden wharf, which would have been a wonderful thing to conserve and on display in a basement somewhere, but that was just buried again.
Yeah,
Imagine going,
unfortunately, London
imagine,
is prime real estate.
yeah, I mean, what they have done, a wonderful thing, is they've reconstructed the Mithraeum much better than it was above ground in the Bloomberg building. So that's definitely a go see. And also, because they now have a museum, in a sense, attached to that, is a big display of the things they found and the what they found in the river that ran past the Mithraeum. Again, organic material, lots of wax tablets, one of the earliest slave sale documents, and some of the characters they found in wax tablets in that valley in London, their names have appeared in Vindolanda as well, which is incredible.
Definitely. I was reading, due to, for instance, the expansion of the high-speed rail network in the UK, there are chance discoveries as well. And many times I read about these, for instance, in the BBC, and they make headlines for that day, for the discovery. But what you don't see is if they're preserved or not. How much time the archaeologists actually have to research the site before it gets destroyed, or maybe probably chances are low that they decide to redirect the train tracks.
Mm, yes. Well, that's why archaeologists like working on our site, which we hope to go back to after the break due to COVID, is because ours is a purely research site and there is no pressure from developers not to spend money, to waste their time delaying construction. So we have on our site lots of professional archaeologists working for free in their holidays, because they enjoy getting back to what archaeology was all about when they first started. And there's no, they just do it for the love of archaeology. But normally, most archaeology in Britain is done now, is development funded archaeology. They're going to build something, they're going to destroy what you find. So you're preserving by record. So there has become a tradition in this country now that it's sufficient to preserve something by record. So long as you've got a digital record, it doesn't matter so much if you then destroy the archaeology. I'm a bit of an idealist. I find that slightly upsetting because there's a romance to being able to see the original wall rather than just seeing pictures of it. But needs must, as they say. We know so much more about Roman Britain because of the BG 16, I think, was the requirement for archaeological assessments to be made of sites. 2/3 of what we know about Roman Britain has been discovered since the 1990s, and it's really changed our understanding of Roman Britain. I was involved in the Roman Rural Settlement Project very peripherally, and what we found out about life in Roman Britain from that is amazing. For the first time, we discovered some tangible cultural differences between tribes, because the tribal maps they've drawn in Britain are a bit arbitrary. We don't really know where the Cataloni's boundary actually ended. We assume maybe it ended at the River Nene because that's an obvious end. One of the clearest examples that there was a tribal boundary there was the difference in burial practices. On one side, they were inhumane, were burying people. On the other side of that river, they were cremating people. So that showed you clear that that river was a clear cultural division line.
Absolutely amazing. The thing though is, I've also read that unfortunately in the UK there's a lot, or sorry, there are cuts at universities, and sometimes archaeological programs are being reduced, to save costs for faculty and what have you. So, I mean, hopefully that won't be a major issue in the future. That there's too few archaeological programs in the UK to really keep up this tradition, even if it's have to do with construction work. That at least there are plenty of qualified people that could go out and do professional work on these sites.
A large number of our workforce were European Union citizens because the digging holes is breaking stuff, not something that us aging archaeologists really want to do. And since Brexit, we've had a shortfall of archaeologists at the precise time when we're actually building more and more things. And yes, University of Sheffield's archaeology departments had a reprieve for 2 years, but they're still going to amalgamate it into other departments. Ever since we made a competitive market for universities, what brings in money is more important than the quality of courses. And we have a lot of money from foreign students, originally like Chinese people. Not a lot of Chinese people want to study archaeology, so departments are chasing those dollars. And so archaeology is a very important specialist science, but it doesn't generate the revenue. But it's certainly very necessary because we're going to continue having requirements unless the government changes the law, and it isn't a requirement to do archaeological surveys before you develop sites. But even when you do archaeological surveys, often they have watching briefs, which mean they turn up once a week or once a month. If you're not there all the time, as with my site, you can miss something. Our site would have been lost to the historical record many times if it wasn't for the fact that I live right next door to it and I have to drive down the road that runs right over my site, so I can always see what's going on. When they were digging in Samuel's school, this was after it was known it was archaeologically sensitive, and they were told that they had to hand dig trenches rather than use mechanical diggers. They had a guy dig a trench for a water pipe, and he was complaining to his supervisor it was very hard going because there were all these stones. They then filled in the trench, which was only about half a meter wide and about a meter deep. But some of the stones they hadn't been able to put back in the trench. And when I looked over the wall at these stones, immediately I knew they were Roman construction stones from a Roman wall, and I could see bits of Roman pottery. So immediately I got in contact with them, and we got them to re-dig that hole at their own expense so we could record it. And we had a cross section of where they went through one of my villa's walls through the eastern wing of my villa. And then later on that year, we went back and did a proper excavation of it. But if I hadn't have driven past that road and kept a look at what they were doing, the archaeologists that were appointed by the borough missed it, and it would have been lost. So there's a lot of luck in archaeology all throughout Europe, I'm sure, and the rest of the world. And so much has been lost because people weren't at the right place at the right time.
Absolutely.
And I have
And
kept every single stone for my Roman walls because we've been given free storage, and storage is a big problem for museums because you have a limited space to store things. And when it's more of the same, it costs pounds per square foot, but we were kindly given because we were a community project, free of charge by a company. So we were able to keep everything we find. And I've kept every single stone from the wall that's not still in the ground, because later on in the future, we'll have more money, or there'll be new archaeological techniques to look at those stones, maybe look at the chisel marks, maybe there'll be other clues that you'll discover, which we can't identify at the moment. Because every single thing's precious to me.
could there, for instance, be um, a local museum that could accept some of these items and display it, or a regional
Well,
museum,
we have
or
been in discussions in the past with our museum. We're very lucky in Bedford. We have a political administration which is very community minded and has managed to manage a very difficult budget, keeping libraries open and keeping museums open, because all throughout Britain there have been cuts. Lots of libraries have been closed, Lots of museums have been closed and their collections sold. We still have a museum, but it's still an ongoing battle, and it's like they're more or less in a holding pattern, just keeping what they've got. And so none of our finds have been added yet to the museum. Hopefully in the future they will be, because this villa is a significant structure in late Roman Britain. But we'll see what happens when we go back and do hopefully one big final excavation, linking different parts of the field together, and see what we find. And we write our final report and build on from there. But it's finding the time to do these things. Excavating is easy. Doing the post-excavation work, the consolidation work, writing reports. Sometimes reports don't get written for 50 or 60 years. So hopefully we'll beat that record.
And Lentulus just wrote in the chat when we were speaking about the events in Merida, I believe. I value this kind of really living Roman state of mind above historical authenticity of reenactment. Life is much more important than reconstructing the past objects. And he's also a well-known Roman reenactor, but not only reenactor, he actually performs real Roman ceremonies. So for you, when you go to Merida or Rome and you participate in these activities, are you doing it more as an actor or more as a living historian, really getting into your role and feeling um, that you were in ancient times?
I guess I would have a role if I'm the editor, because the people who are fighting are not fighting to the death. But the gladiators in Merida, they were free fighting most of the time. And so I made very considered opinions about who should live and die. And one of my friends was quite upset that I didn't realize it was him, but I actually ordered his death, because I'd seen he received so many wounds, if they'd been a real sword, that he was going to die of those wounds. And the best medical treatment wouldn't have saved him. And he may have got gangrene from those wounds, had a very long, lingering, painful death over 2 weeks, 3 weeks, or a month. So I explained to the audience, even though they wanted him to live, there was actually a mercy that I ordered his death. And as a gladiator, he would much rather die quickly in the arena than have this as even if he did survive, survive as an invalid. So I thought very, very carefully about these decisions and put myself in the Roman mindset of the early 2nd century, where only most gladiators, professional gladiators, only died in the arena by accident, or on very rare occasions where it was a fight to the death. As you may know, there is graffiti in Pompeii where they were advertising one of the games there, and it specifically said the gladiators would fight to the death. Well, you wouldn't need to say on an advertisement the gladiators are going to fight to the death if that's what they did all the time. But these are professional boxers, top flight professional footballers. They're so valuable. And a lot of money is made in the rematch, the grud match. If one loses, you want to see him fight that gladiator again to get his own back. And more money is made in gambling, not just on the outcome, but on if they had gambling on who got the first blow in, all these different who struck who, different. They measured their points throughout the whole match, and the referee they had there was excellent. And I'd never seen a referee so well curate a match. So in that sense, I'm a role, because I've never been a gladiator at the games. But other than that, when I'm wearing these clothes, I'm wearing these clothes. It's not a role. Roman culture is a valid culture. It may be few adhere to it, but it still exists. The language is still speakable, so you can adhere to Roman values. You can either be an atheist and be a Roman, because lots of Roman aristocrats were in their writings, you can see they paid lip service to the gods, but they really questioned whether or not that really made sense. So you don't even have to be involved in Religio Romana to be authentically Roman. So when I go to Merida as me. Well, Gaius Petronius Stephanus Turpilianus, and I do what I want to do, honoring my ancestors, honoring your ancestors, because we all have Roman citizens who are ancestors of Roman citizens, even if we know it or not. And if people like what I do and they feel inspired by it, then they may copy it. One of the things I did very early on when I joined Legis Secunda Augustus, as I was replicating Mediterranean society, I made an outfit based on wall paintings for my wife from Pompeii, and I started wearing clavi, which my group had never worn clavi before. So I just started wearing clavi, and then the group liked that and they started wearing clavi. Or the the baldric I made for my gladius, my Pompey gladius, I based it on Alpine portraits of the soldiers, where you have the bronze studs on the red baldric. They liked that, so they decided they were going to do that as well. But I do live and let live, because in the end, we can mimic, but we cannot replicate authentically Roman costume, because unless you go back in it with a time machine and get the original material, it's all replicas. For example, I have people who are very, very adamant that it has to be done absolutely authentically, and then I say to them, well, the ladies who are wearing the makeup you're wearing, does it contain lead sulfate for whitener? Because lead sulfate's toxic, but if you want to be really, really accurate, your white face paint would have lead sulfate in it. Or the jewelry, the gold jewelry you're wearing, was that made with mercury fulminate? Because that's what the Romans used to make their jewelry. The people making it were turned mad by that, because it's poisonous. So do you want the people who made your jewelry to do it the authentic way? So there's always been compromises, even for the most ardent Romanists. And sometimes people seem to use that idea of authenticity as a tool to batter other people with, to show their superiority and to give them some level of importance in their reenactment life they don't have in their real life, because they're not very happy. If I was to go to these events knowing what I know and had that brain turned on, I would go mad, because everyone's making compromises to greater or lesser extents. Even I've made my own bronze backplate, breastplate, and the decoration on that, I've made compromises on how that's been done, and I'm aware of that. So I'm not going to criticize anyone else for what they do, because I've made those compromises, which is why one of the reasons I like collecting and using original Roman artifacts, because then you can't argue with whether that's authentic or not.
Absolutely. I actually remember in the interview I did with Ingenarius in Australia at the beginning of the year, we had a discussion about authenticity versus also affordability, because if you're outfitting a group of men to reenact legions, I mean, all the gear could be extremely expensive. And, there are not too many suppliers that could supply things at reasonable prices that people could afford, and sometimes things happen, but it's not just the look and the feel, but it's also, can people afford this hobby or not? And not everybody has the luxury or the time or the ability to, for instance, make their own armor, and to do hundreds or thousands of hours of research, for instance, on a belt buckle, or for instance, a sword hilt.
All I ask really, is that people try and improve over time. So everyone has an entry level, and they should be aware that they're, due to cost or lack of experience, that may be less than ideal. But over time, as they earn more money, they do more research, see more statues, they make an effort to improve. Although in Merida, I'm not going to mention names or groups, whatever, in Merida, there was a group there whose outfits were entirely fancy dress that you would buy at a shop to go to a party. And I was disappointed that they'd be given such a prominent role, because for other reenactors and other people looking at this festival, although it looked good visually, it did diminish the quality of the event. And I found myself for the first time really having to say things to people about that, because I thought, this goes too far. But I'm not going to go into details of who it was, because it's obviously for them to change. But yes, in the end, Rome was always an ideal. That's what gave Rome traction amongst a widely disparate set of people who were wearing different costumes, different cultural backgrounds. And if you look at why Rome survived the 3rd century, it's because people still believed in it. I have got a badge that is an anagram of Roma. They're quite common on the Danube frontier, and it's a bit like Americans wearing the stars and stripes on their collar. Basically, it's a badge which shows your loyalty to Rome. It's not, when you would think people were very focused about showing their loyalty to the emperor. It wasn't showing their loyalty to the emperor. They're showing their loyalty to Rome, during this very difficult time. And that's why people fought for it. That's why people struggled to keep it together. It was the idea of Rome, what it stood for, civilizing force, etc., etc. But when you came to the 5th century, people had the idealism, they'd lost their idealism about Rome. It became very, very oppressive. And the barbarians, who weren't really barbarian, because the Franks, for example, were Christian and were allies of Rome when they invaded France, people didn't resist because they saw the barbarians as giving them freedom, because they no longer believed in Rome and they no longer believed in preserving it, because there were always more Roman citizens in France, for example, than there were barbarians. And if, as in Ukraine, they wanted to resist, they could have prevented the barbarians from taking over. But as in Afghanistan, they just gave up, and they thought, actually, the Franks are a much better alternative, less taxation, etc., etc. So Rome lost its way as an ideal when it became too oppressive, too much of a security state. And that's the difference between the 3rd and the 5th centuries.
And when you go to these events, what do you normally focus on? Like what time periods? And also, I've seen pictures of you as a gladiator and as a soldier. So what sort of um, I don't know, people do you represent at various events?
Well, I'm here trying to promote Romanitas and people's understanding of Rome. So generally, I will wear what I'm asked to wear. When I travel in Europe, it's just more practical to travel with a toga, because traveling with an armor costs a lot and takes 3 suitcases as opposed to 1. And then you've got the issue of getting swords through. Sometimes some countries are not very happy about, they have legislation about you having swords coming into a country. So, but in Britain, I'll do whatever my group asks me to do. And sometimes I'd rather do less prestigious roles, just to dress down for a bit, but because it looks good on camera, they'll ask me to be the general. Recently I've been asked to be the gladiator because I needed gladiators. I've got a barbarian outfit. I'm quite happy being a German warrior horse, and so I'm interested in all aspects of Rome and building on my knowledge of that. So I have a lot of respect for reenactors who do experiment and try different roles, who prepare to try different roles rather than who just want to focus on one role, especially if it's a very prestigious role, which is just, it might be more about glorifying their ego than actually putting Rome first. Because I try to put Rome first above all else. So whatever I can do to improve people's understanding of Rome, to popularize Roman culture, to get more funding for archaeological research by making the public interested in Rome so they're prepared to vote for politicians who will support this level of research and conservation of sites. It's all, you need to engage with the public to get that support. And some countries or some towns like Merida have done very well at that over the last few years.
And so you mentioned that sometimes you have to have several bags of or because most of the time you travel by plane, I'm sure, to go to these sites. Um, what event have you brought the most amount of
To
gear?
Nîmes by plane. I was asked to come with my full officer's armor. So that was 3 bags. I was no problem going there, but when I came back, my bags had gone through security. Then my name was called out after I'd gone. I was actually putting my things through the scanner to actually go to another room, and they were curious about what was in my bag, and they opened it up, and in my bag was my bronze back and breastplate, and my helmet was inside that, my sword was inside that, and obviously they were just really amazed. And they got their colleagues in, everyone's taking pictures of it. So it's a bit nerve-wracking to have your name called out by security as to what's the problem. But when I go to Holland, I often drive there, so I could take my whole car full, and because I'm there for 6 or 7 days, I normally have at least 1 outfit per day, or if sometimes 2. And I can take everything. And I've made myself some Roman luggage as well, based on wall paintings from the 1st century BC that were found in a very rich urban villa in Rome. And there was a picture of this philosopher, and he was carrying this bag over his shoulder. And because he was resting his arm on the bag, I could work out the dimensions of the bag based on the dimensions of his arm. And it's the same sort of design, this color scheme design. It was clearly, obviously, the aristocrat wanted to portray this philosopher who was a follower of, carrying very upmarket goods. There was no reason to have a white chevron on this bag other than it being some kind of branded label. And so you can imagine aristocrats would be branded like Gucci luggage for rich people. And we do know they did brand things because on shoes we find makers' marks as well. So I made this leather bag based on that to carry my clothes in. And I made another bag to carry ceramics in, which has a wood core. Then I decided to make my water bottle in the same. That's more speculative because we haven't found water bottles with that kind of design. But it makes sense you'd have a matching set of clothes. And the psychology of modern people is very similar to the psychology of Romans. They're only 2,000 years ago. So what colors we find impactful, for the reasons we find them impactful, as human beings, they would find them impactful. Have you ever wondered why, for example, military equipment, clothing often features a lot of red, a lot of black, and a lot of white or silver? One of the reasons is because we are hot wired to see those as warning colors. If you think of what colors does a toadstool have to warn you it's poisonous? It's red, black, and white. Another color combination which has the same impact is yellow and black chevrons, like with bees and wasps. So there is a tendency, you can imagine when they're creating the outfits for armor, they would use those same colors because they have the same impact of being threatening and warning. That's how I see it as a Roman anthropologist, which is a term I've made up because you don't really have anthropologists that are Roman.
Well, it sounds good though.
But I'm interested in the Roman mindset, so that's why it's a slightly different discipline.
Lentulus just wrote an interesting observation in the comments that all reenactors must make compromises. We always have to ponder what our real goal is during our mission. Is it just to show what kind of swords and shoes people of ancient times use, or is it to have an impact on our world, to change our world to the better on the ancient model? And along those lines, what sort of impact have you felt, for instance, in Merida or even in the UK when you go to these events, especially with people that don't have any Roman affinity, seeing an event for the first time? Like, have you had some positive feedback from those type of people?
Well, positive in the sense that it makes people happy in Merida to have a great time. But I engage, aside from my archaeology, when I'm engaging with people who want to be involved in archaeology, ordinary members of the public, most of my Roman life is engaged with people who are interested in Rome, who are Roman reenactors. So my impact on that is, as this morning I was emailing people about togas, about what material would be ideally they should use if they could do. So as in Merida, people ask my advice. They ask my advice all over the world. How do you think we should do this? And I say, well, this is what I would do. But obviously there's difference. You can do things theatrically, or if you've got a chance, you can do it this way. So that's I keep getting asked my opinion about things, which is nice. And so make little differences if people then decide to. One of the things I'm talking about in Merida, I'm very keen on seeing is Praetorian guards, as Praetorian guards would have appeared in Rome, at least up until the time of Septimius Severus. People don't realize Praetorian guards in Rome went around in togas. And the soldiers who wore their sword on the right side, you could just see the hilt of the sword sticking out from the toga. Officers, you couldn't see their sword because it was on the left side. You could tell the Praetorian soldiers because they would wear caligae without studs, but the officers would be wearing equestrian boots. So in fact, you couldn't really tell they were even soldiers at all. And it's very much like the Secret Service around the American president today. But whenever we show Praetorian Guard protecting the emperor in Rome, they're always in military costume. But Augustus was very clear. He didn't want it to appear that his was a military dictatorship. And this tendency carried on there. Of course, there were instances where during civil wars, the soldiers turned up in armor, or there were military parades, special triumphs. But generally speaking, a Praetorian Guard, if you had 6 Praetorian Guardsmen around you, they're all in togas. And one of the groups I'm a member of is very keen to replicate that, because it will be a unique thing. I think no one's ever done that before, to actually have Praetorian Guard dressed correctly for the 1st century AD. These little things like that, which I find, I love it, really.
Absolutely. Wondering, so in terms of your military gear, how much of that um, did you create yourself, and how much of that did you have to buy or commission?
Well, when I started and I had less confidence, less expertise, I bought everything. So my legionary outfit is mostly bought because I was going to mimic, but my officer's outfit is entirely made by me, even down to the sword. And I actually went to an arms fair and I bought a 19th century Victorian machete. And I said to them, "This isn't a valuable antique, isn't it? Because I'm going to butcher this. I'm going to use the blade and make it part of a Roman sword. So I want obviously weapons grade steel." And they said, "No, that's fine." So I took this 19th century Victorian machete and used that as a basis to make my leaf shaped blade for my officer's sword, which is based on a Etruscan pattern, which is also based on Greek pattern, which if you look at the mosaic of the Battle of Issus, where Alexander the Great is defeating Darius, that's in Pompeii, you'll see the sword and the scabbard as part of that mosaic. Because the sword that I'm wearing as an officer is actually already an antique. It's a 500-year-old pattern, but in the same way that soldiers today wear ceremonial swords as a sign of office, in the Roman period, officers would wear ancient pattern swords. So that was the second sword I made, and I made most of my shields. There's a shield behind me, this one, which is I made that in 2016 from handmade plywood. All the metal decoration is handmade, it's applied. It's leather outside, hand dyed leather. That took me a few weeks.
It looks amazing. I actually went to Yale a few weeks ago, and I've seen the only Roman shield still preserved from Dura
Yeah,
Europos, and very vibrant reds and interesting details. So, I mean, you've definitely done a very good job
that
on
would
that.
be a parade shield because Romans had more than one shield in the same way they had more than one tunic. We know from Apuleius's golden ass, he was talking about, I think, at least 3 shields. They were actually loading up a donkey and explaining about the number of shields and also how his armor glinted. So we know the shield decorations glinted. Those shield decorations are based on finds at Calcrease. And as an experimental archaeologist, I've discovered that in fact the metal decorations are not just decorations; they're a way of transmitting energy across the shield. So when you hit the shield, like if you stand on thin ice upright, you fall through. If you lie flat on ice, you don't fall through it. So a shield is less likely to break up if the energy from an impact can be dispersed across the whole shield very quickly. So these shields are very, very complicatedly designed, including using animal sinew in the glue to make sure wherever you hit the shield, the actual energy is dissipated across it. And those metal decorations help do that. So that was something I learned from making the shield and then hitting it.
I didn't even realize that. I just thought it was decoration.
No, no,
So, I
it
mean, that's
helps keep the
very
shield.
valuable information.
Yeah. So that's I don't get to use that shield very often because there is no other shield like that that I'm aware of in the world. And certainly in the groups I reenact with, they use very little metal decoration. It's mainly painted, and they also tend to have linen on the outside of their shield, which they paint rather than leather. Again, horses for courses, different climates are better suited for different types of decoration. And the same thing for sublimaris. Some sublimaris will be better in hotter climates. Some sublimaris will be better in colder climates. So my sublimaris is made of leather. And in hotter climates, you can easily think they continue with the Greek tradition of having it in linen. So we don't have any surviving examples. Obviously, we have to speculate as to what it's actually made of.
Have you made your own helmets or breastplates?
I bought I bought a helmet that I customized to make it into an officer's helmet. But I would have to, if I had a proper workshop and I didn't have a day job and I could do this all the time, I'd have great fun experimenting. I like to do my own pottery, anything. I love making things. It uses a different part of the brain and it's very relaxing. I like hand sewing things because when you're doing, it takes a long time to stitch something by hand, but it's very therapeutic because you're just using a different part of the brain than the brain I have to use as a lawyer.
And how did you get into leather work? Because the shield is made of leather. Behind you are several leather items, and you
Oh, you
made
wanted me to show you
leather
this
shoes.
boot
Exactly.
because I thought, well, I'll give it a go, and I found out I could do it. And I've just got more and more elaborate. This is it's an officer's boot. It's not the most decorated it could be, because that really would require a lot of effort. But also trying to work out what is this. This you see these lion heads on the front of these boots, and trying to work out, it's obviously not a real lion's head because it's too small. And originally, I bought real animal skins, a family of the ferret family, and although the skin is what you would assume it would be, when you look at it compared to statues, it isn't a real skin. It's obviously stylized. So I've actually made these stylized claws as well, and to have very thin leather, which is made of goat. So when it actually creases up, it creates that little effect you have around the top where it looks like it's a sock. But it wouldn't be practical to have a leather sock because that would get too sweaty. There's all sorts of things you have to consider, the practicalities when you do Roman reenacting. You know on a practical level what works and doesn't work. But I've been asked by 2 different people to make these boots for them because no one's making them like this. And the amount of time and effort that went into it, it's not something you want to really do commercially. So I don't know. The first one took me 3 months to make because of experimenting. The next one I did over Christmas, so I did that quite quickly. I did it in 6 days. But yes, I mean, the idea is you have these statues, and you don't have a three-dimensional. So you don't have a two-dimensional pattern. So you have to look at the statue and try and deconstruct. Well, if that's a two-dimensional pattern, what would it look like to then create a three-dimensional image? So there's a bit of trial and error when you make these things. And again, the color scheme, when it's the red and the black and the white, really goes well with the rest of the outfit. So we do have wall paintings which give us some clue as to color, but again, all of that is speculative.
And I mean, to show up in an event with those boots, I mean, that would make such a strong impact because I'm not sure if any other reenactor has similar boots to that.
No, there is another person who plays an emperor who has boots, but the decoration, those lines are painted on. They're not embossed or raised decoration. I mean, these boots can be even more elaborate than that. But I thought I'm going midway. That's a little thing. I don't want to. Again, it sounds like I'm criticizing. There's some obvious things that you should not really do, which are so easy to solve. For example, when people wear heels on their shoes, Romans didn't have heels. Their soles were flat. Heels were introduced by the Sassanids in the 8th to 900s as a solution to riding horses with stirrups, because it gave them greater purchase when they were standing up firing their bows. And then people in Western Europe started adopted using heels because it suggested they were of a military nature, in the same way that some people now wear army fatigues even if they're not in the army, or wear jogging trousers even though they don't jog, to suggest they're physically fit. So prominent heels, became a function of you saying you were identifying with that sportsman-like character. Indeed, even wearing a bowler hat. Bowler hats were originally worn for riding as a hard hat, and again suggested you were sporty to be wearing a bowler hat. And I've at events, and I see people wearing heels on their shoes. Some people who are going around criticizing other people for things. I'm saying, other compromises you need to make because of lack of money, materials, but having heels on shoes is really something that no Roman reenactor needs to do, because adding a heel is, you're adding it, and it doesn't really doesn't add anything to the costume. So I didn't mean to go on a rant there. There's 2 examples of things that
Absolutely.
anyone out there, if you've got heels on your shoes, please take them off.
Just a quick question about the leather work, though. I mean, the craftsmanship is outstanding. How did you get into working with leather?
As I said, I waiting for other people to do things meant that I just decided to give it a go at making it itself. I can't even remember maybe the first thing I made was a satchel that was based on a statue of a sheep herder who had a lamb. He was carrying the lamb in his satchel at his side. I thought that should be an easy bag to make, so I just made that bag. And I think no, I just did it myself. But as I said, if you have any kind of artistic bent, it's easier, because if you can, being an artist, like I paint, and when I was younger, I used to do drawing, pen and ink drawings. there are stages where you have to realize this is the final image you want to get to, but there are stages where it's not going to look like that. So if you have this natural ability to be able to work out how to get from A to B to C to D to get to the final product, if you can do it with a painting and a drawing, then you already have the skill set to be able to do that with something more three-dimensional like leatherwork. That's the main, I think, the main obstacle to people is they know where they want to get to, but they can't imagine the stages in between. So I'm quite fortunate and I've got that ability. I don't do as much painting. I did start painting a Roman room in my house, and I was individually painting all the figures and the rustic scenes. Like they take like 4 hours to do. So I'm fortunate I can do that. But other than that, I don't do much painting. I'm too busy.
Are you painting over wallpaper, or is it a fresco, or?
I'm not doing it using ed tempera. Again, I'm making compromise. I was using acrylic paint, but I've stopped doing it because my life used to be a lot simpler before I started doing Roman reenactment, and then got involved in Star Trek, and then my son doing what he's doing, and then doing the archaeology, running an archaeological dig, and then doing all these festivals. But I'm trying to live life to the full, but I really don't have any free time to find 4 hours to paint. I assume that if I ever get round to retiring, I'll live to be 90, then I'll get round to finishing it when I don't have to earn a living.
Well, since you mentioned Star Trek, I mean, I've seen many photos of you dressed in Star Trek characters, or, for instance, mentions in different events.
Nice little. There we are. It's a tricorder from Star Trek Voyager.
Oh, nice.
Just happen to have handy.
How did you get into the whole Star Trek universe, and how did you also become a performer in various productions?
Well, Star Trek came to Britain when I was 6. I remember my mum telling me that this new series was coming, and I was given special dispensation to stay up late beyond my 7 o'clock bedtime to watch it. And as soon as the first episode was actually quite scary because there were quite dramatic scenes. It was Where No Man Has Gone Before. If I don't know if you know the episode where they two of the crew get telepathic abilities because they cross this barrier at the edge of the galaxy, and then they terrorize the crew. That's quite scary stuff. But I immediately fell in love with it, and because I had quite, in some ways, quite a lonely childhood. In part because I have a high functioning form of autism, which wasn't diagnosed at the time, which meant I had difficulties relating to other people because it's a communications disorder, which obviously I've learned to overcome in the 59 years I've been on this planet. That was like my sanctuary, was the bridge of the Enterprise. So that became a home. I mean, the ship was, and also for the time, people don't realize now the achievement of producing a series like this in the 60s, when all that was going on in America with the upheaval of civil rights, black people still being, as they are now, but even more prejudiced against then, having a polyglot crew of all nationals, even having Russians when we're in the height of a Cold War on board the ship. It was always a television series, but Gene Roddenberry had this vision of it being more than that. It was a vehicle for social commentary. So it was never just a TV series. And the chemistry between Shatner, Nimoy, and DeForest Kelley was lightning in a bottle, which they've never really quite replicated. So very, very impactful. And being autistic, I actually identify with the character of Spock most easily, the one who's in control of his emotions, slightly an outsider. So, and I've been fortunate to meet Leonard Nimoy since then. So that gave me comfort. And, obviously a fan of that series, but there weren't really the opportunities to be actively engaged. There weren't conventions in Britain really, and there weren't very good quality costumes. But then when my son was born, I thought, well, I'll introduce him to Star Trek. So I showed him the Corbinite movie, I think when he was 4 years old. And then he got to like Star Trek. And he just got involved because he got involved in filmmaking. He started contributing with CGI to Star Trek productions. And through that, and also fan productions. And because I'm handy as a performer, he incorporated me in his productions in a way that I used to incorporate him in my productions when I was making Roman documentary. It's the first time Samuel appeared on TV. Well, I think he was 8 years old. He played the young Emperor Caligula on the battle of, when he was fighting with a Praetorian guardsman. He never acted before. They gave him a wooden sword. I made him a set of calici especially for him, which I've still got because little boots is what Caligula meant. And that was for the most evil men in history. So my son played one of the most evil men in history. And my wife and I were also in that production. That was filmed in Bath. And you can still see that on YouTube. It's got 16 seconds, which is quite a long time to be on screen in a documentary, fighting this Praetorian guardsman and talking about it. So there's a lot of symmetry that he was in my productions, and now I'm in his productions. And through him, I've got to know a lot of the people who are behind the producers behind old and new Star Trek, who've become friends. People who designed the Enterprise D and the Enterprise A1. Andrew Probert, who's a very talented artist, who really thought very carefully about his designs. They weren't just artistic; everything had to have a function. And people designed the Voyager as well. Rick Sternbach, he's a friend, and Doug Drexler designed the Enterprise in the series Enterprise, and also appeared on TNG. So through these people, I've become part of that community, which is great because the designers, actors I know some very good actors, but actors make a living from their face and their performance, which is a form of art, but it's more celebrity driven. The producers and the artists who create the sets, and they speak through their art. You don't know who they are. Normally you don't see their faces, so they're not so. It's a different form of egoism, if you know what I mean. And so I like working with and knowing these talented artists who are artists first and foremost. And the animated series that have come out recently, Star Trek, they're much more collegiate because the actors are just voices, and the animators are, in a sense, the actors. And if you've not seen Lower Decks, I recommend you do see Lower Decks. And then in Lower Decks, you may see someone who looks vaguely like me, Lieutenant Commander Stevens, who got up to some interesting shenanigans, including riding naked on his first officer in an episode, which is a bit like The Naked Time, when they were I think it was some chemical contaminated them, and they all got very, very drunk. So yeah. So I'm very pleased to know these people that I've got to know through Samuel, and through him I got a chance to work in the same project that Nichelle Nichols was involved in, Lieutenant Uhura. She did a voiceover for a short film, and then also more recently with George Takei, who everyone knows as Lieutenant Sulu and then Captain Sulu in the films, who I've also met and we've interviewed a few times. That film took 35 years to make because 30 years to make. They started making it in 1982, and a lot of the original footage was done on Cinema 8. And Samuel got involved in that project to help finish it off, doing modern special effects, and he filled out the story. And that's won numerous awards now, which I'm very pleased for Samuel to get credited for his visual effects work. So Samuel does work in this area, but also makes these films for pleasure as well. And he's producing a whole series of short Trek films, which I'm going to be in some of those.
Amazing. I mean, I've seen your Internet Movie Database website, and there's a lot of entries, and you've actually told me yesterday that it's not even updated yet.
No,
so
I
mean,
it requires my son to update it for me. But there are still films which I have more of a prominent role. There is a film I actually star in, if you want to call it that, which is between me and him, which because you're always in COVID, it's very difficult to film when we're relying on other people to shoot their bits, and sometimes, as with the film industry, they don't deliver. So we're having to reshoot various scenes with other people who are going to deliver the scenes to finish that film. I'm looking forward to that one coming out. And then we do the Stargate, the other franchise we're involved in is Stargate. I know a lot of people from the Stargate universe. I'm friends with various of the actors, and we know the producers of that. And we started because Samuel was very keen on Stargate and wanted to be a Jaffa when he was young. We made him a Jaffa outfit. And so we went to some conventions in America, and I found out, we can actually get the original outfits. So I've got one of the largest collections of Stargate props and costumes, which we used to display at conventions, and now we're contributing towards the National Film and Sci-Fi Museum in Milton Keynes, which is an expanding museum where they've got lots of original Star Wars stuff and all sorts of Doctor Who costumes. If you want to go and see Luke Skywalker's original lightsaber from A New Hope, it's there. Han Solo's original blaster from A New Hope, it's there. It's amazing what that my friend's got in his collection. So I'm very pleased that some of my collection is now on a permanent public display, and I'm looking forward to putting more things on display to clear some room out of my house.
Hortensia Faustina just wrote in the comments, Lieutenant Uhura rules. I'm not sure who Lieutenant Uhura is, but
she's Nichelle Nichols, the lady who's a communications officer on TOS, the first black lady to be given. She actually, in the I think Charlie X or some of the early episodes, she was given the bridge. She actually commanded the bridge. So a black woman in 1966 left in command of the Enterprise. It only happened once, but I saw that episode recently. That was really so groundbreaking. The first interracial kiss ever on American TV between William Shatner and Nichelle Nichols. That was between her. So no, she's an iconic woman in terms of civil rights as well, and women's rights in America, because you use Star Trek as a platform to promote those ideals.
Absolutely. I actually knew about the kiss many years ago, because that was not only very important, but people outside of the Star Trek universe knows about that, just because because of TV history and cultural history. Unfortunately, we don't have that much time, so I have a few questions, and then we're going to go into a part of the interview where you describe a few objects in your house.
Mm-hmm.
So the last few questions I have, let me just group them together. One of them is actually from Hortensia Faustina. She asks, do you see more women getting involved in Roman reenacting in Star Trek? And my question would be if you see parallels between Roman history and Star Trek, either thematically or perhaps an overlap in the fan base.
Not really an overlap in the fan base. I have one friend in Group Historica Romana who reenacts Star Wars, and he likes Star Trek, and he's got lots of Star Trek models, and he's also a very passionate Roman. So he's probably the only one who I really know who's involved in those franchises in the same way. What was it about women and being involved?
Do you see more women getting involved in like Roman reenacting? And
But certainly when you expand on the civilian section, there are certain groups who just want to do military, but as soon as you have a civilian section, then women are quite keen to be involved. Leg 2 Augusta has a very strong civilian section. And I started out being a civilian, only came to being military late. I did the first 6 years I was insisted on being civilian, even though people in the group tried to get me to be a soldier. I was keen on wearing a toga. So yes, my experience is that women play a very important role in Roman reenactment, at least the groups that I'm affiliated with or honorary member of. I'm very keen on that.
And thematically, are there some parallels in Star Trek, which you mentioned briefly to me yesterday when we were figuring out the audio and the video and the settings, that Star Trek is a very peaceful setting, whereas Rome, well, obviously some of the society is not. So
Well,
is there some thematic overlaps or not really?
The Federation is an organization where everyone has sorted out their interpersonal problems. So Gene didn't want any kind of interpersonal conflict, which is a staple of dramas and soap operas, which they've reintroduced into New Trek, which Gene was dead set against. He thought by the 24th century, we would have sorted that all out. But certainly the planets they visit, there's conflict. So that's why the Federation can look at conflicts between races. I mean, you've got Let That Be Your Last Battlefield, where a planet has been destroyed by warring factions, and even though the two people return to the planet and see it's been destroyed, they continue with their aggression towards each other. you got bread and circuses, which did actually look at what would Roman society be like in the 20th century. But no, I mean, in the end, Star Trek is very, very different to Rome. And some people have asked me if I had a choice between the two, where would I live? And it would be, I would live in the 23rd century, 24th century, and I would be an officer serving in Starfleet. I cannot think of a more wonderful thing to be than a science officer or an archaeological specialist with a whole galaxy to visit, living in a quasi-utopian society where we don't use money, where men and women are completely equal. There's no racism. But Rome obviously is a real thing, and it's exotic, and it's something tangible we can interact with in a way you cannot interact with a TV series. So I'm happy promoting the best of Rome. Of course, there are lots of things that are not so good with Rome, and slavery is not a very good thing, and having people fight to the death is probably not a very good thing. So as a Roman, I would probably be quite liberal, and there were liberal Romans, as you know, by reading the literature in the Hadrianic period, extension of rights to slaves. I'm very reluctant to sentence gladiators to death. I'm very reluctant to actually personally have slaves. I would probably have more freedmen than slaves. But yeah, they are really quite different worlds.
It's been such a pleasure. Unfortunately, we don't have that much time, so why don't we just jump into the final portion where you could show and describe some of the objects that
Well,
you've
you wanted
collected.
to look at some books, didn't you? First of all, quickly.
Absolutely, that also is part of it.
You might know that guy.
Yes, to be absolutely honest, I'm writing a novel, and
That's when Boris actually personalized it to me.
oh, nice. I'm actually writing a novel, and my working title was My Dream of Rome. And when I was at the British Museum about 4 years ago, I saw that on sale, and then I thought, okay, my working title is impossible because it's so close to that of Boris Johnson, and it's unfortunate coincidence.
Now, I'll try and run through that briefly. I was approached by Tiger Aspect Productions as a Roman expert. They were going to do this documentary with Boris Johnson about the European Union and the ties to the Roman Empire and how there were similarities in its objectives. You know, the Pax Romana, the Pax Europana. And so it was loosely based on my master's thesis, which was discussing those ideas. So we did this 2-part documentary, and he flew all around Europe, and we filmed him in Turkey, where because he's one of his great grandparents is Turkish, and in the end he was saying, how could we imagine we could not let Turkey join the European Union because, you know, all that cultural history, its legacy, and all that sort of thing. And he was very pro-European in that. And then obviously 10 years later, he takes a different position. So obviously wasn't happy with that. But anyway, the Dream of Rome is a fun adventure that we had together, and we were hoping to do more. But then he got selected to be the Mayor of London by the Conservative Party, and he won that election. So that stopped his TV career at that point. But yes, he used to call me the Professor. And when I last saw him, he had just stood down from the first leadership election, which Theresa May won. And he was kind of down in the dumps. And he was really pleased to see me as someone who was non-political, having had a bruising time in the Commons. And he called me the Professor. So that's something I'm particularly proud of. That's my most recent publication, which is to do with a military diploma that I have. So you can't really read it, but this is in the world's leading archaeological journal for papyrological inscriptions, basically Greek and Roman. So and the world's leading expert on Roman epigraphy agreed to co-write that with me. So that was quite a coup. It's printed by the University of Cologne, and they either print articles in English or German. They don't do translations. So there are some in there in German, and mine's in English because obviously I write in English. But it was about a diploma from, I'm going to Bulgaria, and it's actually a diploma from one of the first levy when Claudius annexed Thrace. Then their military became Rome's military. On their auxiliaries, the first cohort Thracians, which served in Britain as well as on the Rhine. I have a diploma fragment from one of the first soldiers to be raised in that levy, who retired in the early 70s. called Sigis. So that's Caroline Lawrence's series, Roman Quests. She was a very popular, a best-selling author, and her other series was made a BBC TV series, which at the time was the most expensive children's TV series. That's Melissa Addy's first book in her current series, and I would highly recommend people go and get this book and read it, because you will feel truly immersed in the Roman world. And this explores what was the aftermath of the eruption in Pompeii. We never think about the rescue effort and all that was involved. We know about the eruption, but what happened afterwards, the people living around there. So part of the book explores that, as well as the first 100 days of the Colosseum and the people who were behind the scenes. And I never really thought about how do you manage such a big event. And her writing, she's very good at characterizations. I'm sure she won't mind me mentioning that, but originally she had, because she was in Italy once when there was an earthquake there and she saw the rescue effort of the Italian army, she thought the legions would rush down to Pompeii to assist them. And I actually worked out for her how long it would take legions to get to Pompeii, which was, there's a calculator from Stanford University which allows you to do that depending on the time of year, what type of transport. And it turned out the closest was the legions in Africa, because when you travel by sea, it's much quicker by land. And they would take 16 days to get there minimum. So the only units of the military that could get there within 3 days by road or a day and a half by coast would be the Praetorian Guards. So that's where I changed her narrative, an example where we didn't have the legions going to assist, but the Praetorian Guard, which was what Titus would have done. That's another book, which is Bedfordshire Archaeology. That's got a brief article about our first year's archaeology excavations at Bedford Roman Villa. So I'm quite pleased to be in that. And you wanted to see that? Well, it's very similar to the ones that were found in Pompeii. So it's very, very thin sheet gold, which when a child's wearing it, they put all sorts of dents in it. So the Romans were not as perfectionist as us, everything having to be perfect. If you look at, go to Nero's palace that survives, you look at how the painting's done there around the windowsills, the lines aren't straight, they're thicker at one end than the other. So it's only mass-produced society in the 19th and 20th centuries that we got used to things being standardized. The reason why this is unfortunately corroded here, which is why it's less expensive than it would have been, is because they gilded copper alloy to make the actual thing that goes around the neck, and so that obviously the copper's actually corroded over time. That's very pleased to have that, which I drink out of every now and then. That's a silver cup, again you'd find very similar from the house of Meniander. That's Tiberian period, so that's early 1st century AD.
Is there any decorations on there?
There is some incised decoration, but if it was decorated, then it would be very, very expensive.
Of course, I mean I've seen a few silver hoards, and those are absolutely amazing what the Romans could do back thousands of years ago.
The thing about collecting, of course, these are all an investment because they appreciate over time, whereas lots of things like cars depreciate over time, is that what is fashionable to the modern eye is not necessarily what I like as a Roman. So that cup is not a very fashionable shape. People don't like collecting that shape of cup. They like collecting the traditional goblet type of cup. So you'll find that when you're seeking to buy those, they're much cheaper because it's not fashionable. And of course, my Claudius, which I've got a temporary hilt on. So,
and is there a? I mean, it's dull now, of course, right? Or is it a bit sharp? The tip?
No, it is sharp, but partly due to corrosion. This ring pommel sword, which is 2nd century, is duller. But again, because a way of protecting swords from rusting is to heat them with a very, very thin shin of olive oil on or oil on to give it a gunmetal color. We don't really know whether Roman swords were actually silver or actually they were more gunmetal in color. My personal preference is for gunmetal color. There's a wine cup from the time of Marcus Aurelius, which I drink out of.
Oh wow, it's perfectly intact, right? I don't see any glue.
As archaeologists, we say there is more surviving intact glassware than there is ceramics, because they tend to put these in graves more. That's a 3rd century silver spoon that I eat out on my birthday or Christmas Day Saturnalia. I tend to 2 times a year at maximum I do a full Roman feast.
Was that a swan or some sort of a decoration?
They call it swan necked, but you'll have a more triangular shaft if it's later, like late 4th century or 5th century. And there's my statue of Mercury.
And that's also intact.
Yes, the base and the statue were separate, but I've actually reattached them using lead solder. That's the sort of thing you do.
Could the location of that be determined where it was made, or
when these things were done at auction? No, so often you don't know. These are from collections that go back in pre-1970 or 2000. There's a difference between what you're allowed to collect now in Britain. That's because I'm into Roman religion. That's actually a bronze patera for actually pouring wine, libations. That does have some decoration. This is a 1st century bronze. You'll see those in the museum at Naples and other places. That's very 1st century from Pompeii for pouring wine.
And there's a face on there.
Yeah, it could be Minerva. I had to reattach that handle as well. So I'm quite pleased with these. These are 1st century BC symbols. So this is the closest you're going to get to hearing what Rome sounded like. So I'm told that's D flat, and that's a special note for chanting for processions. So I'm told these came from Sardinia, so they're cast bronze symbols. So
and are they Roman or are they?
Well, Roman Sardinian, but they're as I said, they're specifically for religious services. So that you're hearing there the sound that a Roman would have heard. So
Amazing.
I've used those in a Roman wedding and things like that.
I've seen numerous items or that numerous times in museums, but I've actually never heard of it. So
that's
amazing.
Actually 3rd century. That's a table amphora for wine, which I use to pour wine out of. And that's earlier. That's like 1st century. That's your glass wine. Glass oil flask for taking to the baths. I can't pronounce the word properly. You'd probably pronounce it better. That's got dolphin handles.
I don't know. Eugenterium or
no? It begins with an A.
Okay,
but that was actually manufactured in Syria and imported all the way to wherever it was. We actually found fragments of one of these on our site in Bedford. We found part of the handle, which I recognise because I've got an original, and that's one of the justifications I have for having an archaeological collection as a finds expert. Is when you live with these things. I have been a trustee of various museums, but when these things are behind glass, you still have a distant relationship with them. When you live with them all the time, you have a much more in-depth three-dimensional feel for them. So when you find fragments in the ground, you can much more quickly identify what they are. Briefly, that's one of the first things I ever got, which is a Metropolitan 1st century AD lamp with a gladiator.
Wow.
That was one of the first things. Very, very small, a lady's stylus, bronze stylus, which is in very good condition. As you can see, it's quite small compared to the bigger ones.
Absolutely.
You have to be very, very careful with styluses or styli, because they were using them right up to the 16th century. We're using wax tablets right up to 1500s. I'm a great fan of Roman 1st century Argentine ware plates.
And that's from Arezzo, right?
Arezzo, yes. I haven't identified them. They've got maker's marks in them, but I haven't got around to identifying them. So when I have my very special Saturnalia meal, when we all dress up in Roman clothes and we light real Roman lamps, we eat off real Roman plates with real Roman spoons to get really into the feeling of being in Rome.
I remember seeing the pictures. I mean, that was an epic event. Not only pictures, but also a few videos associated with that. How much time and detail, or like attention to detail, you put into that, it just blew me away.
Well, I said you can't get more authentic than eating off real Roman plates, drinking out of real Roman cups, and using real Roman spoons. But I am aware they are unique items and they're fragile to a greater or lesser extent. So I don't do it that often as I would do. But as an artist myself, if I knew that a plate that I'd made 1900 years ago, I'm long dead. It's the only thing that survives that shows I ever existed. If I knew that was still being used for the purpose I made it, I would be so chuffed as a craftsman, because we live through our art. And that's a hollow gold ring that I have, and that's 1st century BC, and it has Jupiter's Serapis as the actual intaglio.
Oh wow!
But it's too small for me to wear. And obviously, again, hollow gold rings, when they wore them, they used to damage them because they used to hit things and make dents. And if you look at the rings that we find, you would not wear a ring like that because it looks so tatty. But again, the Roman perception of what was acceptable or not is different to ours. Like tunics, our tunics should not be as clean as they are. My tunic, I'm just a equestrian or senator, it's got stains on it. These are stains you can't get rid of because you can't wash them in the same way because the dye runs. So imperfection is something that is part of Roman society. So it's sometimes very difficult for us to accept imperfection in our outfits because we want things to be exactly symmetrical, things like that. I've got bits of Roman armor, the hinges, the bronze hinges, and the holes are not drilled in the same places. They're not symmetrical in shape, and we wouldn't tolerate that in our modern lorica. It'd be nice to see modern lorica where it is literally handmade and everything is not identical.
Definitely. Back to your tunic. Did you make that yourself?
Yeah, some time ago. So I need to make a new one because it is getting a bit dirty, certainly around the neckline.
Unfortunately, the time is running out. But Lentulus, in the live chat, he wrote that he would love to take a closer look at your Attic helmet.
Right. That's upstairs. I can't really get that.
Okay, but you do have a wonderful helmet right behind you. Could you just briefly show it?
Well, this is a bought one from India, so it's not perfect. I've customized it by putting engraved decoration on it to make it more look like a Mamilo's helmet. But the distance between there and there is too great. So I have to have extra padding in there so it sits properly. So I continue with the theme of waves. But it looks good and people like
Absolutely. When you wear it, I mean, is
it. It's
it
heavy.
so? Is it uncomfortable after a few minutes, or can you
Gladiators
go out for 10 or 20
gladiators,
minutes and still be fine?
No, 15, 20 minutes is fine, but gladiators are not fighting for more than 15 minutes. So basically, when you're performing for the public and they want to see these images, you're wearing these things a lot longer than you would have done in real life. So yeah, it gets uncomfortable after about 4 or 5 hours.
Definitely. And just in the corner of the camera, I do see a little mosaic. Is that an ancient Roman, or is that one that you've done yourself?
If that was ancient Roman, that'd be tens of thousands of pounds. But no, that was done by a gentleman in our group who's a mosaicist, and he was going to break it up to reuse the stone. So I said, no, I'll buy it from you, and that's a replica of one that's from Pompeii, from Ostia.
And is it a dog?
It's a dolphin.
Oh, it's a dolphin. It's a bit cut off, but
And this is a book bucket I made based on a statue from the Museum of Naples. So, and it actually has a cloth handle if you look at the statue. But unfortunately, I've fallen for the trope of actually having terminal ends to my scrolls, which they didn't have such permanent terminal ends until about the 4th century.
but it makes them more handy to take out, right?
It protects the edges of the scroll, so you would think they would actually do that, but they didn't. They had a scroll pin going through the center, but those prominent terminals are quite a modern development, well, modern in Roman terms. But yes, that's what everyone expects scrolls to look like. So that's again one of the compromises that we do. Since you asked me early on, when do I exist? I mean, as a Roman, basically I decided that I will exist 1900 years ago. So every single year we move forward in the calendar, I move forward. So, and that the other advantages of a researcher, as that's given me, is often as historians we look down on events and we telescope them together. We look at the 100 Years' War as a thing, not that it actually took place over, I think, slightly more than 100 years. So since 1998, I've been living every day, month in real time during the Roman period. So I started being a Roman reenactor when Trajan had become emperor just 3 months earlier. So I've gone through his whole reign, 2 Dacian wars. I've gone through his death. I've gone through the accession of Hadrian, because I'm now in 122 AD. And so that's given me a much better understanding of how these events interlink and how they feel as a passage of time, and all the connections between people, how important who you know is. So that's I move, as I said, I move forward every year. It changes. So next year it'll be 123 AD for me. Whereas some Roman groups, of course, they stay in the same year or period all the time.
Now, I'm not sure exactly when the Dacian War happened, but it was during the
101 to 102 and 105 to 106.
Okay, so a bit earlier.
But
But
I know when I remember back to those times, I'm now remembering back. Well, we're 2022, aren't we? Yes, I'm remembering back 16 years now to when the Dacian War ended. So I can actually remember because I was living through it. I can remember that the passage of time since then. So the Dacian War was 16 years ago, and it's just not just a number; it's a real thing. So when I'm in my role as a Roman, I have all these memories. And the other thing, maybe to end on, is because one of the reasons I started writing the book as an autobiography as in the first person, was to be able to live in the Roman period in my head. And when you're running through situations and scenarios, to be authentic as a writer, whether for TV or book or film, you try and live that experience to see what you would do in that environment. And so what I've gone and done is I've generated lots and lots of false memories. I've been in Trajan's triumph in Rome in 107 AD. I've all these different things. I've been in Trajan's Dacian wars. I've been to dinner parties with Pliny and Tacitus. I have relationships through my character with the Emperor Domitian, with the Emperor Nerva, with the Emperor Hadrian even. And so, although they're false memories, they feel very, very real because I've lived in writing. I've written dialogue. Actually, you've now reminded me. I promised to send the Emperor Nerva, who I met at Merida, extract of my book where I had this conversation with the Emperor Nerva, just to amuse him. So that's another thing that lots of reenactors don't have, unless they've been writing novels for 20 years. They don't have that in the first person. They don't have that real interaction in minutiae. So if I wasn't more solidly grounded, I'd probably be schizophrenic or my multiple personalities. Someone said I'm the Mr. Ben of Roman reenactment. I don't know if you know who Mr. Ben is, do you?
I don't,
It was
unfortunately.
a television series where this guy would go into this shop had these various costumes, fancy dress costumes, and he'd try them on, and he'd go into the changing room and he'd be transported into that environment where there's a sailor, an astronaut. So he had adventures in these costumes. It was a magical costume shop, because I have so many different costumes, not just Roman, but Star Trek and Stargate. I have these multiple identities, but I still know who I am, I think.
Well, I mean, that's absolutely a fascinating point, and it's a very good place to end on. I mean, I have a feeling I could speak with you about Roman history for hours and hours. And for me, to see your collection, it's also like a kid in a candy shop. I mean, I love to go to collections uh, in museums, but even private collections are also very interesting because that's something that the public doesn't see. And you also have so much information and history and a personal connection to these objects. So, I mean, these last 2 hours for me have been not only so fascinating, but I've enjoyed every second of our
That's very
interview.
kind of you. It's very kind of you. I mean, I do enjoy when we do our talks, which we're hoping to go back to now. COVID, as at the moment seems to be on the wane, is I would take various of these items along because we have fragments of them which people who are not archaeologists cannot understand or appreciate. But when you actually take the intact item, whether it's a real one or I have various replicas, the audience appreciate it much more. And as you said, they normally only see things behind glass in a museum and have the chance to touch things which are less fragile, like an original Roman sword. That will be a treat for me, and I know it's more of a treat for them because it's something they don't do every day. Whereas obviously, it's more par for the course for me. So I get a big kick out of making people happy and seeing them smile and doing these things. It's just it's so much enjoyment for making other people happy and getting them to appreciate Roman society. So that's what we do.
Well, I mean, thank you so much for your efforts. I mean, you go beyond above and beyond most people, and really, not only making people happy, but really bringing the history to them and making it alive. So, I mean, uh, yeah,
I
I would
do my
just say
best.
keep it up, and I love your Facebook posts and your insights and all of your events. So I want to say thank you for being a part of this, and also thank you everybody in the live chat with your comments. I couldn't get to a bunch of them, but I really appreciate those people as well. And I just hope that you have a nice rest of the day. Today is Sunday, and that you get some rest before your next adventures.
Well, I'll be doing more Roman stuff, that's for sure, more organizing. But in the future, I mean, if people want to just have a question and answer session, I'm happy to come back and just answer questions that people have sent in.
Absolutely. We could definitely do a follow up in the future. I would absolutely love it. And also, this video will make its way to YouTube, so that's an additional audience that could.
Yes, hopefully I haven't said anything too controversial which will cause
Of
problems
course,
elsewhere. I've tried to be diplomatic.
of course. Well, that's unfortunately that's it for today.
Okay,
Thank you so much, and I hope you have a great day.
thanks a lot. See you soon.
Thanks, definitely.